Can I share this table? The cafe went quiet, not because she was loud, but because her voice barely rose above the clink of cups and the hiss of the espresso machine. Still, the question landed heavy in the air. The girl sat alone in her wheelchair near the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture careful, practiced. Her legs were still beneath a soft gray blanket. A half-finished hot chocolate cooled on the table in front of her. She couldn't have been more than 16. Across from her stood a man who looked like life had chewed him up and spit him back out, then dare him to keep going. The single dad froze mid-motion, his tray hovering awkwardly in the air. One hand gripped a paper cup of black coffee. The other steadied a plate with a slightly burned grilled cheese, cut into triangles the way kids liked it. Beside him, a little girl, no older than 6, swung her legs from a chair, humming softly, oblivious to the tension she didn't yet know existed. People were already watching. They always did. The dad noticed it instantly. The sideways glances, the subtle stiffening of shoulders. Some were curious, some uncomfortable. A few were already judging, wondering why a man like him, wrinkled jacket, calloused hands, tired eyes, was being approached by a girl in a wheelchair. The girl swallowed and forced a small smile. "Every other table is full," she added quickly, as if apologizing for existing. The dad didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at his daughter. "Sweetheart," he said gently, lowering the tray onto the table. "What do you think?" The little girl's face lit up. "Can she sit with us?" she asked, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. That was when he smiled, not the polite, strained smile people used in public, but a real one.
Soft, warm,
tired but kind. "Of course," he said, pulling out a chair and then, without a second thought, stepping around the table to help position the wheelchair. "You're welcome here." The girl's eyes shimmered. She hadn't expected that tone, or that ease, or the way he spoke to her, not like she was fragile glass, not like she was a problem to solve, but like she belonged. "Thank you," she whispered. As she rolled closer, the dad knelt slightly, lowering himself to her eye level. "I'm Mark," he said. "And this little chatterbox is Lily." "I'm Emma," the girl replied. What Emma didn't know, what no one in the cafe knew, was that this simple moment was already unraveling something deep inside Mark. Because 2 years earlier, he had been on the other side of that question. Back then, he had been the one standing alone. After the accident, after the hospital bills stacked higher than his paycheck, after his wife's funeral, when grief had hollowed him out so completely that even breathing felt like work. He remembered trying to take Lily out for her birthday, just pancakes, nothing fancy. He remembered the way the hostess hesitated when she saw his worn boots and Lily's secondhand coat. He remembered the whispered, "That table is reserved," even though it clearly wasn't. He remembered Lily asking, "Daddy, did we do something wrong?" So when Emma had asked to share the table, something inside him had clenched and then opened. Now, as they sat together, Lily immediately started talking. "Do you like hot chocolate? Daddy says it's too sweet, but I think he's wrong." Mark chuckled. "I said sometimes." Emma laughed, a real laugh, surprised and a little rusty, like she hadn't used it much lately. They talked about small things at first. School. Cartoons. How Lily hated math but loved drawing. Emma listened more than she spoke, her eyes moving between them with something close to disbelief. No pity. No awkward pauses. Just normal. But the cafe wasn't as relaxed. At a nearby table, a well-dressed woman frowned, her fingers tightening around her latte. Another customer shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Emma's wheelchair and Mark's rough hands. A man near the counter muttered something under his breath. Mark noticed. He always did. His shoulders tensed, old instincts rising, protect, shield, endure. Then Emma spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "I don't usually ask," she admitted. "People get uncomfortable. Or they say yes, but they don't really mean it." Mark met her gaze. "I meant it." There was no grand speech. No dramatic reassurance. Just truth. Something in Emma's chest loosened. Across the cafe, Someone was watching more closely than the rest. A woman seated alone near the back, her coffee untouched, her eyes sharp with attention. She had meant to eavesdrop, but she hadn't been able to look away either, because she recognized that man's posture, that quiet strength. And she knew, long before anyone else did, that this table wasn't just being shared. It was the beginning of something that would change all of them. Emma hadn't realized how long it had been since someone had looked at her without calculating her. Most people did it automatically, eyes dipping to the wheelchair, then quickly back up like they were afraid of getting caught staring. Others overcorrected, plastering on exaggerated smiles or speaking in voices meant for children. Emma had learned to brace herself for it. But Mark didn't do any of that. As Lily animatedly explained how she once tried to teach their cat to wear a hat, Mark listened with half a smile, occasionally glancing at Emma, not to check on her, not to monitor her comfort, but to include her. Like she belonged at the table as much as anyone else. That alone felt strange enough to make her chest ache. "Do you live nearby?" Mark asked casually, tearing his sandwich in half and sliding a piece toward Lily. Emma hesitated. "Kind of. I'm staying at the rehab center 2 blocks away." There it was. The moment when people usually nodded politely and the conversation thinned out, as if her life had suddenly become too heavy to touch. Instead, Mark simply said, "That's a long walk in the cold. I'm glad you found somewhere warm." No pity. No questions about what happened. No assumptions about what she could or couldn't do. Emma felt something unfamiliar stir. Relief. She wrapped her fingers around her mug. "I come here sometimes because it smells like cinnamon," she admitted. "It makes the place feel normal." Lily nodded solemnly. Normal is good. From the corner of the cafe, the woman in the tailored coat shifted in her seat. She had told herself she was only waiting out the rain, that she didn't care about the people around her. But her gaze kept drifting back to that table, the one that shouldn't have drawn attention, yet somehow did. She noticed how Mark angled his body slightly toward Emma, unconsciously including her in the circle. She noticed how Lily leaned in close to Emma's chair, chattering as if she'd known her forever. And she noticed how Emma's shoulders, once tight and guarded, had slowly begun to relax. The woman frowned. She recognized that look. It was the look of someone who hadn't been treated like a burden for the first time in a long while. Emma hadn't planned to stay long. She never did. Experience had taught her that good moments tended to end abruptly, usually with an awkward excuse, a sudden check of the time, or the subtle reassertion of distance. She had learned to leave before that happened. But when Lily asked, "Do you want to see my drawings?" Emma heard herself say yes. Lily nearly fell off her chair, scrambling for her backpack. Mark watched the exchange quietly, something twisting in his chest. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed this simple connection, easy laughter. Ever since his wife died, conversations had felt transactional. People spoke to him out of obligation or curiosity, not warmth. Now, watching Emma smile at Lily's crooked stick figures, he felt a cautious hope flicker. "So," Emma said after a moment, "are you two celebrating something?" Mark shrugged. "Just surviving the week." Lily giggled. "Daddy fixed the sink all by himself." Emma's eyes widened. "That's impressive." Mark laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It flooded the kitchen first, but sure." The normalcy of it all felt almost dangerous, like leaning too close to a fire after being cold for too long. Across the cafe, the woman finally stood. She approached the counter, ordered another coffee she didn't need, and positioned herself closer. Close enough to hear, close enough to see. She told herself it was coincidence. It wasn't. The shift happened suddenly. A man at the neighboring table cleared his throat loudly. "You know," he said, not bothering to lower his voice, "this isn't really a place for group therapy." Silence snapped tight around them. Emma's hands froze on her mug. Lily's smile faltered, confusion flickering across her face. Mark turned slowly. He'd heard comments like that before, on buses, in grocery stores, at playgrounds. Each one hit the same nerve, sharp and immediate. "This is a cafe," Mark said evenly. "People talk here." The man scoffed. "Yeah, but some of us are trying to enjoy our coffee without." His eyes flicked pointedly toward Emma's wheelchair, being made uncomfortable. The word landed like a slap. Emma felt heat rush to her face. She began to murmur, "I can go." "No," Mark said firmly, not taking his eyes off the man. "You're not going anywhere." Lily reached for Emma's hand, small fingers wrapping around hers. "I like her," Lily said, her voice clear and unwavering. A few heads turned. Someone shifted uncomfortably. The tension thickened. Then a calm, measured voice cut through the air. "That's enough." The woman in the tailored coat stepped forward. Up close, she carried herself with quiet authority, the kind that didn't need to be announced. She looked at the man coolly. "If someone's presence makes you uncomfortable, you're free to leave." The man sputtered. "This doesn't concern you." She smiled thinly. "It does now." The café seemed to exhale. Emma stared at the woman, stunned. Mark nodded once, grateful but wary. The woman's gaze lingered on Emma, then Lily, then Mark. Something unreadable passed across her face. "You're all welcome here," she said simply. "Please continue." As she returned to her seat, Mark felt a strange certainty settle in his gut. This wasn't over. Not even close. And Emma, still holding Lily's hand, felt it too, though she couldn't have said why. For the first time since her accident, she didn't feel like a guest in the world. She felt chosen. Emma didn't let go of Lily's hand right away. She wasn't even sure when she'd reached for it in the first place. One moment she had been bracing herself to apologize, to shrink, to disappear like she always did when someone complained. And the next, there was warmth. Steady.
Certain.
Chosen. The word echoed in her mind, unsettling and fragile. Mark noticed. He noticed the way Emma's fingers trembled slightly, the way her breathing was still uneven even after the woman in the tailored coat returned to her seat. He noticed because he'd lived that moment too many times, the moment after someone reminds you that the world doesn't think you belong. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Emma nodded, then shook her head. "I will be." That answer told him more than a yes ever could. Lily, ever practical, said, "Some grown-ups are just bad at sharing." Emma laughed softly. "That's a very kind way to say it." Across the cafe, the woman watched them again, this time without pretending not to. Her name was Claire Whitmore. Most people in the city knew it. They just didn't know her face. She had built half the downtown district, offices, housing, community centers, then quietly funded the other half through foundations that never carried her name. She had learned long ago that power was loud enough on its own. It didn't need advertising. But this table had caught her off guard. She recognized something in Mark she hadn't expected to see in a man dressed like that. Not desperation. Not resentment. Resolve. And she recognized something in Emma too. Survival. "I should probably go," Emma said after a while, though she didn't move. "My session ends in an hour." Mark nodded, understanding the language of almost leaving. "Well," he said, "if you ever want company that comes with bad jokes and crayon art, we're usually here on Thursdays." Lily gasped.
Dad.
"You're inviting her back." Mark smiled at his daughter. "I am." Emma blinked. "I don't want to impose." "You're not," he said simply. That was how it happened. No dramatic promise, no forced sentiment. Just an open door. Claire felt something tighten in her chest. She had spent years sitting across from men who negotiated entire cities without ever truly seeing the people who lived in them. She had learned to read posture, tone, intent. Mark wasn't performing kindness. He was practicing it. The door chimed as another customer entered, letting in a gust of cold air. Emma shivered. Without thinking, Mark stood, draped his jacket around her shoulders, and sat back down as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Emma stiffened in surprise. "Oh, I'm okay," she started. "I know," Mark said. "But you're cold." She fell silent, throat tight. Across the cafe, Claire's fingers curled slowly around her cup. That jacket, frayed at the cuffs, clearly worn thin, wasn't excess. It was something Mark needed. And he had given it without hesitation. Claire had seen generosity before. This was different. This was instinct. "You're a good dad," Emma said softly. Mark looked away. I try. I think your mom would be proud, Emma added, then winced. I'm sorry, I didn't mean. It's okay, Mark said, voice steady but quieter now. She would have liked you. The words surprised him as much as they did Emma. For a moment, grief sat between them, not heavy, just acknowledged. Lily broke the silence by pushing a drawing toward Emma. This is you, she announced. You're a superhero. Emma smiled, eyes shining. I am. Yeah, Lily said matter-of-factly. You're brave. No one had called her that since the accident. Claire looked away, blinking hard. As Emma prepared to leave, Mark helped maneuver her wheelchair carefully, asking before touching anything, waiting for her nod. The small respect of it made her chest ache all over again. At the door, she hesitated. Thank you, she said, then laughed nervously. For saying yes. You have no idea how much that mattered. Mark met her gaze. I think I do. She left, the bell chiming softly behind her. The cafe felt different without her. Lily watched the door for a long moment. She's nice, she said. I hope she comes back. So do I, Mark replied. Claire stood then, finally. She approached the table slowly, as if not wanting to startle them. You handled that well, she said to Mark. He looked up, guarded but polite. Thank you. She glanced at Lily. You're a good judge of character. Lily beamed. I know. Claire smiled despite herself, then turned serious again. What you did today, it mattered. More than you probably realize. Mark shrugged. I just shared a table. Claire shook her head. No. You made space. She reached into her coat and placed a card on the table. If you ever need anything, she said, call me. Mark stared at the name. His breath caught. He knew it now. Everyone did. Claire Whitmore. Lily leaned over. Daddy, is she famous? Claire chuckled. Only on boring days. Mark looked up slowly. Why are you doing this? Claire met his eyes. Because I've built a lot of places in this city, she said. But today, you reminded me what they're supposed to be for. She turned and walked away. Mark sat very still, card in his hand. Somewhere down the street, Emma rolled toward the rehab center, wrapped in a jacket that still smelled faintly of coffee and kindness. And for the first time in a long while, all three of them felt the same quiet certainty settle in their bones. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. Emma didn't sleep that night. The rehab center was quiet in the way hospitals always were, too quiet, like the walls were holding their breath. The faint hum of fluorescent lights filled the gaps between thoughts, and the moonlight spilled across the floor in pale rectangles. She lay awake, Mark's jacket folded neatly at the foot of her bed. She told herself she would return it the next day, and that would be the end of it. Just a kind moment. Nothing more. But her mind kept replaying the way Lily had taken her hand. The way Mark had said I meant it. The way, for once, she hadn't been asked to justify her presence in the world. For the first time since the accident, Emma allowed herself a dangerous thought. What if I didn't always have to sit alone? Across town, Mark sat at his small kitchen table, the card still resting beside his coffee mug. Claire Whitmore. He had looked her up after Lily went to bed, heart pounding as page after page confirmed what he already suspected. CEO. Philanthropist. One of the most powerful women in the city.
And she had seen him.
Not the version people usually saw, the tired mechanic, the widower scraping by, but the man he was trying every day to be for his daughter. It unsettled him. Power like that didn't intersect with lives like his by accident. And yet, she hadn't offered money. She hadn't made a show of it. She'd just said, call me if you need anything. Mark folded the card and tucked it into his wallet, unsure whether he'd ever have the courage to use it. The next Thursday, the cafe smelled like cinnamon again. Emma hesitated outside, hands resting lightly on her wheels. Don't expect anything, she told herself. This was just kindness, not a promise. Still, when she rolled inside and saw Lily's pigtails bobbing at the familiar table, her heart leapt. Lily spotted her first. Emma, she squealed, hopping off her chair before Mark could stop her. Mark looked up, surprise flickering across his face, then something softer. "You came back," he said. Emma smiled. "I'm returning something." She handed him the jacket, neatly folded. Mark took it, then draped it over the back of his chair. "You can keep it here," he said, "in case it gets cold again." She laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in weeks. They fell into conversation easily, as if no time had passed. Lily showed Emma a new drawing. Mark talked about a car he was fixing that refused to cooperate. Emma spoke about her therapy session, how she'd stood, just for a moment, with braces and parallel bars. "I was terrified," she admitted, "but also proud." "You should be," Mark said. This time, no one complained. A few people glanced their way, but others smiled. One woman even moved her chair slightly to make more space. Kindness, Emma realized, was contagious when given room to breathe. Claire watched from the counter again. She hadn't planned it this way, hadn't intended to return at the same time. But something about that table had stayed with her, tugging at her thoughts during board meetings and charity galas. She noticed the difference immediately. Emma sat straighter now. Her voice carried further. Mark laughed more freely. Lily glowed with the satisfaction of having brought two worlds together. This wasn't charity. This was community. Claire approached slowly, setting her cup down as she reached the table. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to an empty chair. Mark exchanged a glance with Emma, then nodded. "Of course." Emma studied Claire curiously. "You own half the city, don't you?" Claire smiled. "On paper." "Then you already know what it feels like to be stared at," Emma said. "Just for different reasons." Claire's smile faded into something thoughtful. "I do." Lily leaned forward. "Do you have kids?" Claire paused. "No." "Then you can borrow my dad," Lily said generously. "He's really good." Mark nearly choked on his coffee. Emma laughed, covering her mouth. Claire laughed too, genuine, unguarded. It surprised her. They talked longer than expected. About access ramps and buildings designed without thought. About how loneliness didn't discriminate, it just found different ways in. About how easy it was to walk past someone and never really see them. At some point, Claire turned to Mark. "You ever thought about doing more than fixing cars?" He stiffened slightly. "This is what I know." "And you know people," she replied. "You create safety without even trying." Mark frowned. "I'm not sure what you're suggesting." Claire didn't push. Just thinking out loud. Emma felt a strange sense of anticipation settle in her chest. Something was shifting, slowly, deliberately. When they finally stood to leave, Claire placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. "You're welcome here anytime," she said. Then, quieter, just for her. "And if anyone ever makes you feel otherwise, you tell me." Emma nodded, emotion tightening her throat. Outside, as they said goodbye, Lily hugged Emma without hesitation. "You're our friend now," she declared. Emma swallowed hard. "I'd like that." As she rolled away, she glanced back through the cafe window. Mark stood with Lily at his side, sunlight catching them just right. Claire watched them too, something resolute settling behind her eyes. 3 lives, briefly intersected, now moving closer together. And none of them fully understood yet what that would mean. But they all felt it. Change was no longer a distant idea. It was already in motion. The first real change didn't arrive with a speech or a headline. It came quietly, on a Tuesday morning, when Mark's phone rang in the middle of a repair job. He wiped grease from his hands, frowned at the unfamiliar number, and nearly let it go to voicemail. Something made him answer. "Mark Harris?" a calm voice asked. "Yes." "This is Claire Whitmore." His heart skipped. "Is everything okay?" "I hope so," she said. "I was wondering if you had time to meet. Just to talk." He looked at the half-disassembled engine in front of him, then at the clock. "I can make time." That afternoon, Mark sat across from Claire in a glass-walled office that overlooked the city. He felt painfully out of place, oil-stained boots on polished floors, but Claire treated him like he belonged there. "I've been thinking about that table," she said, without preamble. "About how naturally people gathered around it." Mark shifted uncomfortably. I didn't do anything special. That's the point, Claire replied. You made inclusion feel ordinary. She slid a folder toward him. Inside were plans for a neighborhood cafe and repair space combined. Open tables, wide aisles. A place designed intentionally for people like Emma and Lily and men like him. I want you to help me build this, Claire said. Not as a mascot, as a partner. Mark stared at the pages, throat tight. I'm not qualified for this. Claire met his gaze. You're exactly qualified. When Emma heard the news, she cried. Not quiet tears. The kind that came from somewhere deep and old. You see, she said later, wheeling beside Mark and Lily as they toured the empty building. This started because you said yes. Mark shook his head. It started because you asked. The building smelled of dust and possibility. Sunlight streamed through tall windows. Emma imagined people rolling, walking, limping, wandering in, no apologies required. Lily spun in a circle. Can we have a piano? She asked. Emma smiled. Only if you promise to practice. I promise, Lily said, crossing her heart. Claire watched them from the doorway, something dangerously close to hope swelling in her chest. The cafe opened 6 months later. The line wrapped around the block. There were no signs announcing inclusive or accessible. There didn't need to be. The space simply was. Ramps built into the design, tables that moved easily, menus in multiple formats, a staff trained to ask before assuming. Emma cut the ribbon. Her hands shook, but she stood tall, braces locked, eyes bright. This place exists, she said into the microphone, because someone once shared a table with me. Applause thundered. Mark stood near the back, Lily perched on his shoulders, both of them blinking hard.
Claire didn't speak.
She didn't need to. Weeks later, Emma returned to the same cafe, their cafe, alone this time. She positioned herself at a table near the window, hot chocolate steaming in front of her. A little boy hovered nearby, glancing at her chair, then at the empty seat. He said softly. Can I sit here? Emma smiled. Of course, she said, moving her mug aside to make space. Across the room, Mark noticed and felt something settle peacefully in his chest. Claire watched too, knowing this was the real success, not buildings or headlines, but moments that replicated themselves. Lily leaned over to her dad.
See?
Tables are for sharing. Mark kissed the top of her head. They always were. That evening, as the cafe lights glowed warm against the dusk, Emma wheeled outside, breathing in cinnamon and coffee and the sound of laughter. She wasn't invisible anymore. She never had been.
She just needed someone to say yes.
And once they did, the world, slowly, beautifully, learned to do the same.